The gunshot echoed across the dusty canyon, silencing the desert birds that had been singing their evening songs. Georgina Sawyer pressed her trembling hand against the blood seeping through her dress, her vision blurring as she watched the three riders disappear into the sunset, taking her father's gold and leaving her to die alone in the unforgiving New Mexico Territory wilderness of 1878. Darkness had nearly claimed her when the sound of approaching hoofbeats stirred her consciousness. A silhouette appeared against the fading light, a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut stallion. The stranger knelt beside her, his weathered face coming into focus as he gently moved her hand to examine the wound. "They left me for dead," she whispered through cracked lips, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. The cowboy's eyes, blue as a summer sky, met hers with unexpected tenderness. "Then I'll stay until you live again," he said, his voice deep and certain as he lifted her broken body from the blood-stained earth. Georgina drifted in and out of consciousness as the stranger carried her to his horse. Pain shot through her side with every movement, but his strong arms held her securely. She caught glimpses of his face, sun-bronzed skin, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and those eyes that seemed to promise safety. "Name's Yates," he said as he settled her before him in the saddle. "Yates Blackwood. Got a cabin not far from here." "Georgina," she managed to reply before darkness consumed her again. The journey seemed endless, each hoofbeat sending waves of agony through her wounded body. When they finally reached a small cabin nestled against a rocky hillside, Georgina was barely conscious. Yates carried her inside and placed her gently on a narrow bed. "Stay with me, Miss Georgina," he urged as he gathered supplies to tend her wound. "You're not dying today, not if I have anything to say about it." The bullet had torn through her side, missing vital organs but leaving a nasty wound that would soon fester without proper care. Yates worked methodically, cleaning the injury with whiskey that made Georgina cry out in pain despite her weakened state. "I know it hurts something fierce," he said, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle. "But infection's a worse enemy than any gunslinger." Through her haze of pain, Georgina studied her unlikely savior. He moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to hardship, his actions precise and efficient. When he finished bandaging her wound, he pulled a chair beside the bed and settled in for the night. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yates was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the small fire in the hearth. "Out here, we don't leave folks to die alone. That's not the way of things." "They did," Georgina said, tears welling in her eyes as she remembered the men who had ambushed her stagecoach, killed the driver and her father, and taken everything of value before shooting her and leaving her for dead. "They're not men," Yates replied, his voice hardening. "They're vultures. Now rest. Morning comes early, and you need your strength." Georgina awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, she tried to sit up only to be reminded of her injury by a sharp pain that took her breath away. "Easy now," came Yates's voice from across the room. He approached with a cup of steaming liquid. "Willow bark tea. Tastes like the devil himself brewed it, but it'll help with the pain." Georgina accepted the cup with shaking hands. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." "Just Yates," he corrected, helping her sit up enough to sip the bitter tea. Never much cared for formalities. As the days passed, Georgina's strength gradually returned. Yates proved to be an attentive caretaker, changing her bandages, preparing simple but nourishing meals, and keeping watch over her through the long nights when fever made her delirious. During one such night, when nightmares of the attack had her thrashing in bed, she awoke to find Yates holding her hand, his voice low and soothing as he told her stories of his travels across the frontier. Tales of magnificent canyons carved by ancient rivers, of plains stretching endlessly beneath star-filled skies, of wild horses running free across valleys untouched by civilization. "How did you come to be alone out here?" Georgina asked one evening as she sat up in bed, finally strong enough to feed herself the rabbit stew Yates had prepared. He paused, setting down his own bowl. "Wasn't always alone. Had a wife once, back in '68. Yellow fever took her and our baby boy. His voice remained steady, but Georgina saw the shadow of grief cross his face. After that, wide open spaces seemed more comforting than town walls. I'm sorry, Georgina said softly. Yates nodded in acknowledgement. What about you? What brought you to this territory? Georgina stared into her stew, memories washing over her. My father was an assayer. We were traveling to Silver City where he'd been offered a position with a mining company. Her voice caught. He was all I had left after my mother died 3 years ago. And now those men have taken him too, Yates said quietly. The Sutton gang, Georgina confirmed, her hand clenching into a fist. I recognized their leader, Ellis Sutton. His face was in wanted posters all across Arizona territory. Yates's expression darkened. I know of them. Vicious bunch. They'd been terrorizing travelers between here and Fort Sumner for months. I need to go to the authorities, Georgina said, attempting to swing her legs over the side of the bed. Her determination quickly faltered as pain lanced through her side. You're not going anywhere just yet, Yates said, gently but firmly helping her back against the pillows. Marshal Everett in Cimarron is a good man, but he's got his hands full. By the time you're well enough to travel there, the Suttons could be halfway to Mexico. So they just get away with murder? Georgina's voice rose with frustration and grief. I didn't say that, Yates replied, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. But first you heal. That's what matters now. As another week passed, Georgina began to move around the cabin, initially leaning heavily on Yates's arm, then gradually managing short distances on her own. She learned that Yates made his living hunting, trapping, and occasionally guiding travelers through the territory. His cabin, though small, was well built and surprisingly comfortable. One afternoon, while Yates was out checking his traps, Georgina discovered a trunk containing books, dozens of them, well worn and clearly treasured. Dickens, Thoreau, Whitman, and many others filled the wooden chest. When Yates returned to find her sitting by the window with a volume of Emerson's essays, a look of embarrassment crossed his face. Didn't take you for a literary man, Mr. Blackwood, Georgina said with a small smile. A man needs company through the winter months, he replied, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Words can be good companions when snow blocks the trails. That evening, Georgina asked him to read aloud, and they began a nightly ritual. His deep voice gave life to the words on the page, and for hours, they could both forget the harshness of their reality. 2 weeks after her arrival at the cabin, Georgina stood at the edge of the small clearing, watching the sunset paint the distant mesas in shades of gold and crimson. Her side still ached, but the wound was healing well thanks to Yates's careful attention. Beautiful, isn't it? Yates said, coming to stand beside her. I never noticed before, Georgina admitted. The territory always seemed so harsh, so unforgiving. I couldn't wait to reach Silver City, where there would be proper streets and buildings. The land doesn't forgive carelessness, Yates agreed. But it rewards those who respect it. He pointed to a hawk circling above. Like her. She understands the patterns here, the rhythm of life and death. Georgina studied his profile as he watched the bird. The setting sun highlighted the strength in his features, but also a gentleness she'd come to recognize during her time in his care. You could have left me, she said suddenly. Most men would have. Yates turned to her, his expression serious. I'm not most men. No, Georgina agreed quietly. You're not. That night, as they sat before the fire, Georgina broached the subject that had been increasingly on her mind. I need to decide what to do. Where to go? Yates nodded slowly, poking at the embers with a stick. You're healing well. Another week or two, you could safely travel to Cimarron. And then what? She asked, voicing the uncertainty that haunted her. I have no family, no money. Everything was taken. You could find work there, Yates suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Or in Santa Fe, perhaps. A young woman with your education wouldn't have trouble finding a position as a teacher or shop clerk. Georgina stared into the flames, imagining a future alone in a strange town. The prospect filled her with dread. Or, Yates continued after a long pause, you could stay. For a while longer, at least. Until you're fully recovered and have had time to consider your options. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of the connection that had formed during their time together. I wouldn't want to impose, Georgina said hesitantly. It's no imposition, Yates assured her. Truth be told, I've grown accustomed to having company. The following days brought a shift in their relationship. No longer simply caretaker and patient, they became partners in the daily routines of frontier life. Yates taught Georgina to identify edible plants, to set simple snares for rabbits, to read the weather from cloud patterns. In return, she organized his collection of books, mended his clothes, and brought a woman's touch to the sparse cabin. One morning, Yates returned from checking his traps to find Georgina attempting to chop wood, her face determined despite the obvious strain on her healing wound. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, striding across the clearing to take the axe from her hands. Earning my keep, she replied, her chin lifting stubbornly. I won't be a burden. You'll reopen that wound is what you'll do, Yates countered, setting the axe aside. There are other ways to contribute that won't undo all my hard work patching you up. Georgina crossed her arms. I'm stronger than I look, Yates Blackwood. I don't doubt that for a minute, he said, his expression softening. You survived being shot and left for dead. That takes more strength than most men I know possess. But healing takes time. His concern touched her, and Georgina felt her irritation fade. I just don't want you to regret letting me stay. Yates stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. I won't regret it, he said softly. For a moment they stood there, the morning sun warming their faces, something new and fragile growing between them. Then a distant sound broke the spell, hoofbeats approaching. Yates moved swiftly, guiding Georgina toward the cabin. Get inside, he instructed, his voice low and urgent. And stay there. He retrieved his rifle from beside the door before positioning himself near the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by a large pine. The rider came into view, a young man on a bay horse, wearing the dust-covered clothes of a traveler. He reined in his mount at the sight of Yates's rifle. State your business, Yates called out. Looking for water for my horse, the stranger replied, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Name's Jim Caldwell. I'm heading to Fort Sumner. Yates lowered his rifle slightly but remained wary. Watering holes just beyond those rocks, he said, gesturing to the east. You can fill your canteen there. The young man nodded gratefully. Much obliged. Been riding since dawn. He hesitated, then added, Don't suppose you've heard any news from Cimarron Way? Supposed to be meeting my brother there. Haven't been to town in weeks, Yates replied. From inside the cabin, Georgina watched through a crack in the shutters, her heart racing. Something about the stranger's manner seemed off. His eyes kept darting around the clearing, taking in details. Shame about that stagecoach robbery near Apache Canyon, the young man continued conversationally. Folks in Las Vegas are saying one of the passengers might have survived. A woman. Yates's expression remained impassive. News travels slow out here. Haven't heard anything about it. The stranger studied Yates for a long moment, then shrugged. Well, thanks for the directions. I'll be on my way after I water my horse. As the young man turned his mount, Georgina caught a glimpse of something that made her blood run cold, a distinctive silver belt buckle shaped like a longhorn steer's head. She'd seen it before, on one of the men who had attacked the stagecoach. When the rider had disappeared from view, Yates returned to the cabin, his face grim. He was one of them, Georgina said immediately. One of the Sutton gang. I recognized his belt buckle. Yates nodded, already gathering supplies and stuffing them into saddlebags. They're looking for you. We need to move. Now. Where can we go? Georgina asked, quickly gathering her few possessions. I have a friend, an old trapper named Gideon, who has a line cabin up in the high country. It's remote, hard to find unless you know where to look. Yates checked his rifle and pistol. We can lie low there until we figure out our next move. Within minutes, they had packed essential supplies and were mounted on Yates's chestnut stallion, heading deeper into the wilderness. Georgina sat before Yates in the saddle, his arms around her, as he guided the horse along barely visible game trails. Why would they be looking for me? Georgina asked as they rode. They took everything of value. I'm no threat to them. Yates's voice was grim against her ear. You can identify them. In these territories, that's enough reason for men like the Suttons to want you dead. They rode through the day and into the evening, following streams to hide their tracks, taking routes that would challenge any pursuers. As night fell, they made a cold camp in a secluded ravine, not daring to light a fire that might give away their position. Huddled beneath Yates's heavy coat, Georgina tried to control her shivering more from fear than from the cooling night air. They won't find us, Yates assured her, his arm around her shoulders. I know these mountains better than any lowland outlaw. I've brought nothing but trouble to your door, Georgina said miserably. You should have left me in that canyon. Yates turned to her, his face barely visible in the moonlight. Don't ever say that again, he said, his voice fierce with emotion. Finding you? It was like finding a reason again. A purpose. His words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Georgina found herself leaning closer to him, drawn by the warmth and security he represented. Yates, she whispered, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. He touched her face gently, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. We should rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be another long day. They resumed their journey at first light, climbing steadily into higher terrain where pines and aspens replaced the scrub vegetation of the lower elevations. By midday, they reached a small plateau where a crude cabin stood nestled against a rocky outcropping. Gideon's place, Yates explained as he helped Georgina dismount. He won't be here until autumn. Spends summers over on the western slopes. The cabin was simple but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and basic furnishings. Yates quickly set about securing the perimeter while Georgina sorted through their meager supplies. We can stay here a few days, Yates said when he returned. Let the horse rest. Then we need to decide our next move. What options do we have? Georgina asked, setting water to boil over the small fire she'd built. Yates sat heavily on a rough-hewn chair. We could try to make it to Santa Fe. There's a federal marshal there who might take an interest in the Sutton gang. Or we could head north, maybe all the way to Denver. Put some real distance between us and them. Us, Georgina repeated softly. You're planning to stay with me? Yates met her gaze steadily. I made you a promise, remember? I'll stay until you live again. And if I'm already living again? She asked, her heart beating faster. Then I'll stay because I want to, he replied simply. That night, as wind whistled through the pine boughs outside, they shared the cabin's single bed, a respectable distance between them despite the close quarters. Georgina lay awake, listening to Yates's steady breathing, wondering at the turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been traveling with her father, anticipating a new life in Silver City. Now she was a fugitive, dependent on the protection of a man she barely knew yet trusted completely. And somewhere along the way, that trust had blossomed into something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken when their hands accidentally touched or when his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. The next morning brought clear skies and a sense of temporary safety. They spent the day making the cabin more comfortable, repairing a leaky section of roof, and inventorying their supplies. Yates set snares in the surrounding forest, while Georgina gathered wild onions and berries to supplement their dwindling food stores. As they worked together, Georgina found herself studying Yates when he wasn't looking, the broad shoulders that carried such burdens without complaint, the hands that could be so gentle despite their strength, the eyes that had seen so much hardship yet still held kindness. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing a meal of rabbit stew, Yates suddenly asked, "What would you be doing now, if things had gone according to plan?" Georgina considered the question. "I'd be in Silver City, I suppose, helping my father establish himself with the mining company. Looking for suitable lodgings." She smiled ruefully. "Probably attending socials at the church, meeting respectable young men with prospects." "Respectable young men," Yates repeated, a hint of something like regret in his voice. "Not grizzled frontiersmen who live in cabins miles from civilization." "No," Georgina agreed softly. "But plans change. People change." She met his eyes across the small space between them. "I've changed." Yates held her gaze, the firelight playing across his features. "How so?" "I used to think I knew what I wanted. Security. Comfort. A predictable life." She gestured around them. "None of this was in my plans. And yet—" She paused, gathering her courage. "And yet I can't imagine being anywhere else. With anyone else." The words hung between them, an admission that changed everything. Yates set his bowl aside and moved to sit beside her on the rough bench. "Georgina," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I'm not a man of many words. Never have been. But I need you to know that finding you, helping you heal, it's changed me too." He took her hand in his callous fingers warm against her skin. "I was existing, not living. Going through each day with no purpose beyond survival. And then there you were, fighting to live despite everything. You reminded me that there's more to life than just enduring it." Georgina felt tears well in her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Not just of dying, but of being alone. And then you came, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." Yates reached up to brush a tear from her cheek, his touch infinitely tender. "You're not alone. Not anymore." The space between them vanished as he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. Georgina wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, feeling the solid warmth of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you first sat up in bed and called me Mr. Blackwood in that proper Eastern accent of yours." Georgina laughed softly. "And I've been wanting you to do that since you read Whitman to me by firelight." Their newfound closeness brought a sense of peace that night as they lay together, Yates's arm protectively around Georgina's waist, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady rhythm of his heart. Morning brought reality back into sharp focus when Yates, returning from checking his snares, reported fresh hoofprints in the soft earth near the stream. "Could be a solitary traveler," he said, though his expression belied the casual words. "Or it could be that our friend from yesterday wasn't convinced by my story and followed our trail." Georgina felt fear clutch at her heart. "What do we do?" "We need to move, but carefully. If it is the Suttons, they'll be watching for us." Yates began gathering their essential supplies again. "There's an old mining camp about 10 miles west of here. Abandoned years ago, when the silver played out. We can take shelter there temporarily." They set out at midday, taking a circuitous route that Yates hoped would throw off any pursuers. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to dismount and lead the horse through narrow passages between towering rock formations. As they navigated a particularly treacherous section of trail, a distant sound froze them both: the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot, followed by the whine of a bullet ricocheting off stone nearby. "Run!" Yates urged, pushing Georgina ahead of him toward a cluster of boulders that offered some protection. More shots followed as they scrambled for cover, the horse breaking free and bolting in panic. From the shelter of the rocks, Yates peered cautiously at the ridge above them. "I count 3 of them," he said grimly. "They've got us pinned down." Georgina pressed herself against the sun-warmed stone, heart pounding. "Can we outrun them?" "Not without the horse. And not with them holding the high ground." Yates checked his rifle and the ammunition in his belt. "I've got maybe 20 rounds. Not enough for a prolonged fight. So we're trapped, Georgina whispered, the reality of their situation sinking in. Yates's face was determined as he turned to her. Not yet, we're not. There's a narrow ravine about 50 yards to our right. If we can reach it, it leads to a series of caves I know. We could lose them there. Another volley of shots peppered the rocks around them, sending stone chips flying. They're trying to keep us pinned while they move into position to flank us, Yates explained. We need to move now, while we still can. He fired several shots toward the ridge, not aiming to hit but to force their attackers to take cover. Run when I tell you, he instructed Georgina. Don't stop for anything. After firing 2 more shots, he gripped her arm. Now! They broke from cover, running in a crouched position toward the ravine Yates had indicated. Bullets kicked up dust at their heels as they ran, the sound of angry shouts following them. Just as they reached the edge of the ravine, Georgina heard Yates grunt in pain. He stumbled but kept moving, pushing her ahead of him down the steep slope. Yates! She cried, seeing blood spreading across the sleeve of his shirt. Keep moving, he insisted through gritted teeth. It's just a graze. The ravine narrowed as they descended, its walls rising on either side to form a natural corridor that offered some protection from gunfire. They pressed on, Yates leading the way despite his injury, occasionally pausing to listen for sounds of pursuit. After what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, they reached a jumble of massive boulders where the ravine widened slightly. Yates guided Georgina through a narrow opening between 2 of the largest rocks, revealing a hidden cave entrance. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, and darkness enveloped them as they moved deeper into the earth. Yates produced a small tin of matches from his pocket and lit a stub of candle he always carried. We should be safe here for a while, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. This cave system is extensive. Unless they know it as well as I do, they won't find us easily. In the dim candlelight, Georgina could now see the extent of his injury. A bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow. Let me see that, she insisted, tearing a strip from her petticoat to use as a bandage. Yates submitted to her ministrations, wincing slightly as she cleaned the wound with water from his canteen. It looks worse than it is, he assured her. Bullet just grazed the muscle. You've been shot because of me, Georgina said, her voice thick with guilt. First I bring danger to your home, and now this. Yates caught her hand as she finished tying the makeshift bandage. I chose this, he reminded her. All of it. From the moment I found you in that canyon. Their eyes met in the flickering candlelight, and despite the danger surrounding them, despite the uncertainty of their future, Georgina felt a surge of emotion so powerful it took her breath away. I love you, she said simply, the words emerging without conscious thought. I know it's happened quickly, perhaps too quickly to be sensible, but I love you, Yates Blackwood. For a moment, he was perfectly still, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he pulled her to him with his good arm, his kiss conveying what words could not: passion, tenderness, and a promise. I love you too, he murmured against her lips. Have since the day you scolded me for calling Emerson overwrought. Knew right then you were a woman like no other. Their laughter, soft and intimate, echoed in the cave, a moment of joy amid peril. They remained in the cave through the night, conserving the candle and sharing body heat against the underground chill. Yates explained that the cave system had natural springs and air vents, making it possible to stay hidden for days if necessary. The Suttons won't linger too long, he reasoned. They're wanted men. The longer they stay in one area, the greater the risk of running into a marshal's posse. What if they don't leave? Georgina asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if they're determined to find me? Yates's arm tightened around her. Then we find another way. There's always another way. Morning brought a decision. They would navigate through the cave system to its western exit, which would put them closer to the territorial road leading to Santa Fe. If they could reach the city, they could seek protection from the authorities and perhaps find passage farther east, beyond the reach of the Sutton gang. The journey through the caves was arduous. Some passages required them to crawl on hands and knees through narrow openings, others to wade through shallow underground streams. Yates's knowledge of the system proved invaluable as he guided them through the labyrinthine darkness, their way lit only by the occasional match when absolutely necessary. By late afternoon, they emerged into daylight on the western side of the ridge, blinking against the sudden brightness. The landscape before them was different from the eastern slopes, more arid, with scattered juniper and pinyon instead of the denser pine forests. "We need to find water and shelter before nightfall," Yates said, scanning the horizon. "And I need to hunt. We've exhausted our supplies." They set off across the rugged terrain, moving cautiously and staying close to cover whenever possible. Without the horse, travel was slower and more exhausting, especially for Georgina, whose wound, while mostly healed, still troubled her during extended exertion. As dusk approached, they found a small spring bubbling from a rocky outcrop. Nearby, a natural overhang formed a crude shelter that would provide some protection for the night. While Georgina gathered wood for a small, well-shielded fire, Yates fashioned a simple snare from materials in his pockets. His resourcefulness continued to impress her. He seemed prepared for any eventuality, a man truly at home in this wild country. Their dinner that night was meager, a single rabbit shared between them, but the spring provided clean water, and the knowledge that they had successfully evaded their pursuers, at least temporarily, lifted their spirits. Under the vast canopy of stars, they spoke of what awaited them if they reached Santa Fe. Yates knew a former army officer there who now worked for the territorial government, and might be persuaded to help them. "And after Santa Fe?" Georgina asked, her head resting on Yates's shoulder as they sat close to the small fire. "Where would we go?" Yates was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I've been thinking about Colorado. The high country. There's good trapping there, and small settlements where a man with some savings could perhaps start a trading post." "A trading post?" Georgina repeated, imagining a life in such a place. "Would there be room for books in this trading post?" Yates chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "A whole shelf of them. Maybe two." "And would there be room for a wife as well?" she asked softly. Yates shifted to look at her, his expression serious in the firelight. "Is that what you want, Georgina? To be a trapper's wife, far from towns and society? It's a hard life." "I want to be with you," she replied simply. "The rest is just details." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then yes, there would be room for a wife. More than room, there would be a place of honor, a place of love." Their kiss sealed the understanding between them, a commitment made under the vast western sky, witnessed only by the ancient stars. The next day brought clear weather and renewed determination. They set out at dawn, Yates leading the way toward a distant mesa that marked their route to the territorial road. By midday, they had covered several miles, the terrain gradually becoming less severe as they descended toward the valley. It was Georgina who spotted the dust cloud first, a distant plume rising from the direction they were heading. "Riders?" she asked, pointing. Yates studied the dust through narrowed eyes. "Too much dust for just a few men. Might be a wagon train. Or what?" Georgina prompted when he fell silent. "Or a military patrol," he finished. "They sometimes escort mail coaches through this territory." Hope surged through Georgina. "If it is soldiers, they could help us. Take us to Santa Fe." Yates nodded slowly. "It's a risk. If we're wrong and it's the Suttons with reinforcements, we'd be exposing ourselves. But if it is a patrol, it might be our best chance." After a brief discussion, they decided to approach cautiously, using the scattered junipers for cover until they could identify the travelers. As they drew closer to the source of the dust, the distinctive blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers became visible, a patrol of perhaps 15 men escorting a mail coach along the rough road. "Army," Yates confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "Looks like the 9th Cavalry. Buffalo soldiers. Good men." They emerged from cover, Yates with his hands clearly visible, approaching the patrol at an angle that allowed them to be seen well in advance. The soldiers reacted quickly, 2 riders breaking from the main group to intercept them, carbines at the ready. "That's far enough," called one of the soldiers, a sergeant by his insignia. "State your business." "We need assistance," Yates replied calmly. "The lady and I have been pursued by outlaws, the Sutton gang. We're trying to reach Santa Fe." The sergeant studied them suspiciously, noting their disheveled appearance, and Yates's bandaged arm. "The Sutton gang, you say? They're wanted for the stagecoach robbery near Apache Canyon. 3 passengers killed." "4," Georgina corrected, stepping forward. "My father, Thomas Sawyer, the driver, and a commercial traveler whose name I never learned. I was shot and left for dead." Her words caught the sergeant's attention. "You're a survivor of that attack?" There were reports, but most thought it just rumor. "It's no rumor, Sergeant," Yates confirmed. "I found her wounded in the canyon and took her to safety. The Suttons discovered she survived and have been hunting us since." The sergeant conferred briefly with his companion before nodding decisively. "You'd better come with us. Captain Reynolds will want to hear your story. We're bound for Fort Union, but he might be persuaded to provide you escort to Santa Fe." Relief washed over Georgina as they were led to the mail coach. The driver grudgingly made room for them among the mail sacks, and soon they were continuing along the rough road, surrounded by the protection of the cavalry patrol. Captain Reynolds, a stern-faced man with intelligent eyes, interviewed them separately when the patrol stopped to make camp that evening. He seemed particularly interested in Georgina's ability to identify members of the Sutton gang. "Ellis Sutton and his brothers have been a plague on this territory for too long," the captain told them after hearing their accounts. "The Army's jurisdiction is limited in these matters, but I can arrange for you to meet with Marshal Hollister in Santa Fe. Your testimony could be valuable in bringing these men to justice." That night, in the relative safety of the military camp, Georgina and Yates were provided with blankets and a hot meal luxuries after their days of hardship. They sat slightly apart from the soldiers, speaking quietly of what awaited them. "Will you come with me to speak to the marshal?" Georgina asked. Yates hesitated. "I'm not one for towns and officials. Never have been. But you'll be with me?" The question held more meaning than just the immediate future. Yates reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I'll be with you," he confirmed. "Every step." The journey to Santa Fe took 3 more days. Captain Reynolds, true to his word, detached 4 soldiers to escort them after the main patrol continued on to Fort Union. They traveled without incident, though Yates remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats. Santa Fe was unlike anything Georgina had expected. The territorial capital was a curious blend of Spanish, Mexican, and American influences, with adobe buildings lining narrow streets and a central plaza bustling with activity. After so many days in the wilderness, the sights, sounds, and smells of the city were almost overwhelming. Their military escort took them directly to Marshal Hollister's office, a small adobe building near the government offices. The marshal, a barrel-chested man with a graying mustache, listened intently to their story, taking detailed notes of Georgina's description of the Sutton gang members. "You've given us more to work with than we've had in months," he told her when she finished. "The territory's governor has authorized a substantial reward for information leading to the Suttons' capture. With your testimony, we might finally bring them to justice." "What happens now?" Yates asked, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the marshal's office. "Miss Sawyer will need to remain in Santa Fe for the time being," Marshal Hollister explained. "We'll arrange suitable accommodations. There are formality statements to be taken, documents to be signed. And for her safety, it would be best if she stayed under our protection until the Suttons are apprehended." Yates nodded, though Georgina could see the tension in his jaw. The prospect of remaining in the city, surrounded by people and buildings, clearly made him uncomfortable. After leaving the marshal's office, they were escorted to a small hotel where rooms had been arranged for them, separate rooms, a propriety that seemed absurd after their days of intimate proximity in the wilderness. Once alone in her room, Georgina sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events that had brought her to this place. She had lost her father, been left for dead, found love in the most unexpected circumstances, and now faced an uncertain future in a city far from anything familiar. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Yates standing there, looking as out of place in the hotel corridor as a wolf in a parlor. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice low. Georgina stepped aside, closing the door behind him. In the small room, his presence seemed even larger than usual, his wilderness-hardened frame incongruous against the flowered wallpaper. "You look troubled," she observed. Yates paced the narrow space between the bed and the window. "This place. These people. It's not my world, Georgina." "Nor mine," she reminded him gently. "But we're here for a purpose." He stopped pacing to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "And when that purpose is fulfilled? What then?" Georgina crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "Then we decide. Together." Yates covered her hands with his own. "I meant what I said about Colorado. About a trading post. About making a life." "As did I," Georgina assured him. "About wanting to be with you, wherever that might be." His kiss was different here, somehow both more restrained and more urgent, as if the walls around them had created new boundaries and new desires simultaneously. When they parted, Yates pressed his forehead to hers. "I should go. There's already talk among the hotel staff about the wild man accompanying the young lady." Georgina smiled. "Let them talk. You saved my life. You've earned the right to call on me in my room." Despite her brave words, they both recognized the need to observe certain proprieties if they were to remain in Santa Fe. Yates reluctantly returned to his own room, leaving Georgina to ponder the strange turns their journey had taken. The following days established a new routine. Mornings were often spent at the marshal's office, where Georgina worked with a sketch artist to create likenesses of the Sutton gang members and provided detailed accounts of the stagecoach robbery. Afternoons were her own, and she used the time to explore Santa Fe with Yates as her somewhat reluctant companion. To her surprise, Yates began to relax slightly in the urban environment, particularly when they discovered a small bookshop tucked away on a side street. The proprietor, an elderly man named Abrams, recognized a kindred spirit in Yates and welcomed them to browse his collection for hours. "You have quite a scholar hiding beneath that frontier exterior, Mr. Blackwood," Georgina teased as they left the shop one afternoon, Yates carrying a small parcel of books he'd purchased. "Don't tell anyone," he replied with a rare smile. "It would ruin my reputation as a fearsome mountain man." Their evenings were often spent in the small garden behind their hotel, where they could talk privately about their hopes and plans. Yates had received word from a trapper passing through Santa Fe that his cabin had been burned, presumably by the Suttons in retaliation for his helping Georgina. "I'm sorry," Georgina said when he told her the news. "You've lost your home because of me." Yates shook his head. "It was just a structure. 4 walls and a roof. Easily rebuilt." He took her hand. "Home is something else entirely. Something I'm only now beginning to understand." A week into their stay, Marshal Hollister summoned them to his office with exciting news. A patrol had captured one of the Sutton gang members, a young man named Caldwell, the same one who had visited Yates's cabin. "He's turned informant," the marshal explained. "In exchange for leniency, he's provided the location of the gang's hideout, a ranch near the Colorado border. We're organizing a posse to go after them. I want to be part of it," Yates said immediately. Marshal Hollister considered him thoughtfully. "Could use a man who knows the country." "And you have as much reason as anyone to want the Suttons brought to justice." "No," Georgina protested. "It's too dangerous. These men are killers." Yates's expression was resolute. "Which is precisely why they need to be stopped. For what they did to your father. For what they tried to do to you. No amount of argument could dissuade him. The posse would depart the following morning, a group of 10 men including Marshal Hollister, several deputies, and experienced frontiersmen like Yates. That night, their farewell was bittersweet. They sat together in Georgina's room, propriety forgotten in the face of Yates's imminent departure. "I've something for you," Yates said, reaching into his pocket to produce a small object. He placed it in Georgina's palm, a simple ring fashioned from silver, with a small turquoise stone set into the band. "I had it made by a Navajo silversmith here in town," he explained as Georgina examined it with wonder. "It's not fancy, not like what a proper Eastern lady might expect, but it's beautiful," Georgina interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. "Truly beautiful." Yates took the ring and slid it onto her finger. "I want you to wear this. Not just as a promise that I'll return, but as a promise of what will follow when I do." "Are you asking me to marry you, Yates Blackwood?" Georgina asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am," he confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Though I know I'm not what your father would have chosen for you. I'm older, rougher, with little to offer beyond my hands and my heart." Georgina silenced him with a kiss. "Your hands have healed me," she whispered against his lips. "Your heart has saved me. There is nothing more I could ask for, nothing more I need." That night, they crossed a boundary they had not yet dared to cross, their love expressed in the most intimate way possible. In the darkness of the small hotel room, far from the wilderness where they had found each other, they discovered a new kind of connection, one that bound them even more tightly together. Morning came too quickly. Standing in the pre-dawn light outside the marshal's office, Georgina watched as the posse made final preparations to depart. Yates, mounted on a sturdy bay horse provided by the territorial government, looked every inch the frontiersman, capable, vigilant, dangerous to those who threatened what he valued. "Come back to me," Georgina said simply as he leaned down from the saddle for a final farewell. "Nothing could keep me away," he promised. She watched until the posse disappeared from view, the dust of their passage hanging in the morning air like a veil between her past and her future. The days that followed were the longest of Georgina's life. She continued to assist in the legal preparations for the case against the Suttons, but her heart and thoughts were with the posse tracking them through the wild country to the north. Word came after 10 days, a telegram from a remote telegraph station reporting that the posse had engaged the Sutton gang in a fierce gun battle at their hideout. Ellis Sutton and one of his brothers had been killed. The remaining gang members had been captured and were being transported back to Santa Fe to stand trial. The telegram mentioned casualties among the posse but provided no names, leaving Georgina in an agony of uncertainty. She haunted the marshal's office, seeking any additional information, but none came. It was on the 14th day after the posse's departure that a dust cloud on the northern horizon heralded their return. Georgina stood on the steps of the government building, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun, desperately scanning the approaching riders for the one figure she sought. As the posse drew closer, she could make out Marshal Hollister in the lead, followed by several deputies escorting prisoners, sullen men with bound hands. Behind them came more riders, some supporting wounded companions. And then, at the rear of the procession, she saw him, Yates, his arm in a crude sling but very much alive, his eyes already searching for her among the gathering crowd. Georgina ran, heedless of decorum, pushing through onlookers until she reached him. Yates dismounted awkwardly, wincing at the movement, but his good arm opened to receive her as she flung herself against his chest. "You came back," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I promise," he reminded her, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "And I keep my promises." Later, in the privacy of his hotel room where Georgina insisted on tending his wound, a bullet had shattered his collarbone during the final confrontation with the Suttons. He recounted the events of the pursuit and battle. "It's over," he told her as she finished applying a fresh bandage. "Ellis Sutton will never harm another traveler. And those who survived will face justice for what they did to your father and the others." Georgina sat beside him on the bed, her fingers tracing the lines of his face as if to reassure herself that he was truly there. And us? What happens now? Yates captured her hand, pressing a kiss to the silver and turquoise ring she still wore. Now we begin. If you're still certain this is what you want. More certain than ever, she assured him. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at Santa Fe's small Episcopal church. Marshall Hollister stood as witness, along with the bookshop owner Abrams, who had become a friend during their time in the city. Georgina wore a blue dress purchased with part of the reward money she had received for her role in bringing down the Sutton gang. Yates, his arm still in a sling but healing well, had reluctantly purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion, though he drew the line at formal town shoes, preferring his worn but comfortable boots. The remainder of the reward money, combined with Yates's savings, provided them with a solid foundation for their future. After considerable discussion, they decided to pursue the trading post plan in Colorado, selecting a location near a growing settlement along the South Platte River. The journey north was leisurely, allowing time for Yates's injury to heal completely. They traveled by stagecoach for the first leg, then purchased a sturdy wagon and team to carry their supplies and the beginnings of their trading inventory, goods selected carefully in Denver to appeal to both settlers and trappers in the more remote regions. By the time autumn painted the aspen groves gold, they had established their home and business, a solid log structure with living quarters in the rear and a well-stocked trading area in the front. True to his word, Yates had built shelves specifically for books, which quickly became a draw for customers from miles around. Georgina discovered an unexpected talent for business, keeping meticulous records and developing an intuitive sense for what goods would be needed in the changing seasons. Yates, meanwhile, maintained his trapping lines during the winter months and served as guide for hunting parties in the summer, his intimate knowledge of the country a valuable asset. Their first child, a daughter they named Eleanor after Yates's mother, was born the following spring. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, a perfect embodiment of the love that had brought Georgina and Yates together. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on the porch of their trading post, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Sometimes Yates would read aloud from one of their precious books while Eleanor slept in Georgina's arms. Other times they would simply sit in companionable silence, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked one such evening, 5 years after their first meeting in that dusty canyon. "The life you might have had if things had gone differently?" Georgina considered the question, her gaze taking in their thriving trading post, the garden she had planted, the small corral where their horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, the silhouette of the Rocky Mountains stood sentinel against the darkening sky. "How could I regret a journey that brought me exactly where I was meant to be?" she replied, reaching for his hand. "They left me for dead, but in doing so, they led me to life. Real life, with you." Yates squeezed her fingers gently, the silver and turquoise ring catching the last rays of sunlight. "And I'll stay until the end of our days," he promised, echoing the words that had begun their story. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, two souls who had found each other against all odds, creating a home and a legacy in the vast wilderness of the West. The stars emerged one by one above them, witnesses to a love born in desperation but flourishing in hope, a love as enduring as the land that had brought them together.